Is Lake Lanier haunted? Pretty much anytime I make a video talking about Lake Lanier, I get comments that say, don't you know Lake Lanier is haunted? Do you know the story of Lake Lanier? So what are they talking about? Is Lake Lanier haunted? What? So Lake Lanier is a man-made lake that's visited by over 10 million people every single year. The lake takes up about 38,000 acres or 59 square miles of water and has 692 miles of shoreline at the normal levels, and it stretches through 5 different counties, 10 different marinas, 2 of which are the largest inland marinas in the world. Now, I made an entire video talking all about Lake Lanier that you have to check out. Did you know that even with almost as nearly as many visitors that visit Disney World's Epcot theme park every single year, the lake was not originally made for recreation? So if Lake Lanier is not a naturally occurring lake, why in the world was it built and how? This thing is massive. So in 1950, the United States Army Corps of Engineers kicked off a 6-year project to construct the lake. It was to provide hydroelectricity, navigation, and flood control of the Chattahoochee River, and of course provide water for the city of Atlanta. And it was made by the completion of the Beaufort Dam on the Chattahoochee River in 1956. So it's important to know this, that in order to build the lake, they took 57,000 acres of land and they purchased it, and they were using those 39,000 of those acres were cleared and flooded to make the lake. So think about that. They purchased 39,000 acres of land and they flooded it and created this lake. So over 700 families had to move out of their homes and leave their farmland. Now, the land was bought from these people by the government, and get this, it was just for a measly average of $30 per acre. Now, some people believe that people weren't actually paid for their land, but were rather run off of it or refused to leave and were lost when the area was flooded. Several covered bridges were removed, graves were relocated, and some concrete and brick structures are actually still there in the lake today. They were just covered up by water. Now, many trees and buildings were left standing if they were going to be at least 35 feet below the full level of the lake. They just thought, what the heck, we'll just leave them there. Now, keep in mind though, that the lake is not always at a full level. There was even a racetrack that was used by drivers who were training for NASCAR called Gainesville's Looper Speedway, and that was abandoned and left to be flooded. So there are actually 160 small islands that line Lake Lanier that you can find all across the lake, and those islands are actually the tops of hills in the farmland. So this area was predominantly occupied by African Americans who many say were forced out, and the idea that they were paid for the land is bogus. The creation of the lake is where the idea that it is haunted comes from. Since an entire town was flooded to create the lake, and some cemeteries and buildings were left behind, or the idea that some people refused to leave their land, that's where people get this idea that it's haunted. Just search YouTube. You'll find tons of videos talking about how Lake Lanier is haunted. We talked about how trees and other items are going to be 35 feet below the full level of the lake. Something that the planners did not take into consideration was that the lake is not always at the full level. Now, in 2006, it was discovered that a lake gauge that had been replaced and the new one did not properly calibrate it. So it incorrectly read that the lake was 2 feet above the actual level. This caused nearly 22 billion gallons of excess water to be released. Now, Georgia was already having very dry conditions at the time, and there was very little rainfall. So this caused a severe drought throughout 2007. During this time, the lake was obviously extremely low. Many people's docks ended up sitting on dry land. Some of those trees that were left behind because they were below the full level when the lake was constructed were now a lot higher up in the water, and this was quite a safety hazard. The stadium seats to the old racetrack we talked about earlier resurfaced during this drought, along with other trash and debris that had either been thrown in the lake or was just left there whenever it was constructed. Now, recently, the state of Georgia and the Army Corps of Engineers agreed to pay $71 million for permanent water storage at Lake Lanier. This creates a greater certainty of water supply, which will hopefully ensure that we don't have record low water levels like we've seen in the past. So people have differing opinions on reports about how many people have actually died on Lake Lanier. Some news reports claim that more than 200 people have died in swimming and boating accidents on the lake since 1994, and then others say that that number is closer to 170. Some state that since the lake was created, over 500 people have died on Lake Lanier. One detail that everyone can agree on, though, is that there have been 27 bodies that have never been recovered over the years. They're still out there. Maybe that's why people think the lake is haunted, and that is a little creepy. There are plenty of old stories that have been told over the years, and one of the more famous ones is the story of Susie Roberts and Delia Parker Young. They were dubbed the Lady of Lake Lanier. In April of 1958, Susie lost control of her car while going over what is now known as Jerry Jackson Bridge. After the accident, neither Susie or her passenger Delia Parker Young or the car were found. And so 18 months after the accident, the body of Delia Parker Young was found floating under the bridge. Fast forward to 34 years later in 1990, when crews began dredging out the lake bottom to set pillars for the new bridge, they found Susie Roberts and her car filled with mud, half buried at the bottom of the lake. Another popular lake legend came about when a chicken truck crashed on Thompson Bridge Road. If you don't know about the chicken trucks in Gainesville, I do have a video that talks about that as well. So this chicken truck overturned, and when divers went down into the lake to investigate, they claimed they saw catfish so big they were eating the wet chickens whole. I can tell you this, my husband has never caught anything nearly that big on the lake, but that doesn't mean that that can't be true. So while those numbers of drownings sound horrible and there's been some horrific accidents on the lake, these are similar statistics that you'll find on any major body of water. Take Lake Michigan or Lake of the Ozarks, for instance. They both have a significant number of deaths per year. Any huge body of water that is highly visited by boaters and visitors definitely will. And hopefully this increase in water supply, because of the lawsuit we talked about, will keep water levels high and help minimize the accidents that happen on Lake Lanier. But one thing that we do know, boater safety is definitely something that you need to study up on and take very seriously if you decide to live on the lake or you choose to come visit it. So, does Lake Lanier sound haunted to you? I have lived on the lake for several years now, and I've never thought it was haunted. I do, however, feel for those who had to relocate and lost their land in order for the lake to be constructed. Since the lake was never meant to be used for recreation, I think it's really fascinating how it's become, such a popular place for boating, fishing, water skiing, kayaking, any water sport, you name it. And like we talked about earlier, over 10 million people each year come to Lake Lanier to enjoy it, but many people have a tough time kind of accepting its past, and the creation of Lake Lanier is very fascinating. There's an entire city under the lake. That's crazy. If you ask me if Lake Lanier is haunted, no. However, it's not surprising to find many lake homeowners to tell you, yes, Lake Lanier is haunted and you definitely should not come. Now, why would they say that? Obviously, they want to keep lake visitors low so that they can enjoy the lake all to themselves all the time. And of course, they want to keep competition for lake home purchases low as well. If you're thinking about purchasing a home on Lake Lanier or selling a home, I would love to be your resource and help you. I'm Sarah Maslowski with KeyPoint Homes by Sarah, the key to a great real estate experience.